and we will start our webinar all about the SNO Site Designer. Before I go to my demo site, I am going to share this support article with everybody in the Zoom chat. Important to note that the SNO Site Designer is a tool that is only available if your site has been converted to Flex Pro, which is our most updated current version of our design theme. So if you're not sure if your site has been converted to Flex Pro, probably most of your sites already have. But if you're not sure, you can scroll all the way down to the bottom of your homepage and you will see this label here, and it'll either say Flex WordPress theme by SNO or it will say Flex Pro WordPress theme by SNO. So I can see that mine says Flex Pro, which means that this site designer tool is going to be available to me. If yours says Flex, that means you have not yet converted to Flex Pro. And I shared that support article in the chat for everyone that will walk you through the process of how to convert your site into Flex Pro. It's a really quick process. It takes about a minute, and definitely still follow along today as we're going through the site designer, but just note that you won't have access to the site designer until you make that conversion to Flex Pro. A couple other things before I dive in, I want to just share with you. These are all related to those things that I talked about before we got started. Our upcoming webinars are all in the dashboard of your site here. So we would love if you could join us for future webinar sessions. We've got a lot of really design specific things this week. So again, if you can register for any of those future sessions, those are all listed here. And then I'd also mentioned the option to view our instructions and tutorials, which you can get to by hovering over SNO support here and clicking on the instructions and tutorials tab. And then also the option to submit a support ticket to us, which again, you can hover over SNO support and submit a support ticket here, either requesting access to this recording or submitting any particular questions that you have. So all of that said, let's get started talking about the site designer. And I do want to just clarify some terminology first that you'll hear me use as we look at this site designer. And really this terminology all relates to your homepage. Your homepage is split into 3 different areas. And the top area up here, we'll start at the top. This is what we call your site's header area. Basically, on my demo site here, everything from these social media icons down to the menu, kind of the top quarter of your site there. And again, we call that the header area. Then as I scroll down, kind of the body of my homepage or the bulk of the homepage here is made up of different widgets. These little blocks of content are all called widgets. So features, news, entertainment, my sports scroller here. Again, all of those little blocks of content that build the body of my homepage are widgets separated into different widget areas. Now, we will talk briefly about widgets today, but if you are interested in learning more about widgets specifically, I would encourage you to sign up for a future webinar on widgets. We've got a couple this week. And then the bottom of the homepage is your footer area. So usually the name of your site, maybe another menu, social media icons down here, kind of the bottom quarter of your site there. So we're going to see all of these 3 areas reflected as we move into the site designer. To get to the site designer tool, I'm going to hover over the SNO dashboard tab here in the upper left-hand corner of my site. And it's going to be located in my site's design options. So it's going to be the very last drop down there when I hover over SNO dashboard. And when I open up my site's design options, I've got a lot of different things here on the left that I can kind of toggle between to make changes on my site. But the one that we are focusing on today is the site designer. So I'm going to go ahead and click into that. And once I have this site designer open, I've got those 3 areas of my homepage reflected. So I've got my header area at the top, my homepage widget areas with all of my widgets in them, and then my footer area down here at the bottom. 2 other things that I will just mention before we get started on this. Only users with the administrator user role are going to be able to access this site designer tool. The other thing I will mention, and you'll see why in a minute, is that whenever you're working either in the site designer or any other design location in your site, I highly recommend having your site open in two different tabs. This first one I'm going to keep on the dashboard, or in this case, the site designer. And the second one I'm going to keep on my homepage. And again, you'll see why in a minute. So within this site designer, I'm going to start with the header and the footer design of the site. Those two spaces work the same. So all of the tools that I'm going to go through in the header, you have those same tools available down here in the footer. So kind of starting with the easiest thing up here, which would be editing or changing any of your existing header elements. So I can see up here a good blueprint of all of those elements. I've got my social media icons, current date and search icon at the top there. I can see those elements on the home page. Then as I move down, I've got that site header text element, which is displayed right in the center. And then finally my menu bar there at the bottom. So again, probably one of the easiest things that you can do is just edit your existing elements. So let's say I'm looking at these social media icons and I don't like the appearance of them. I want to go in and change how they look. To edit any of these existing elements, I'm going to hover over the element and then click on the little gear in the upper left-hand corner here. And that is going to open up all of my editing options for that particular element. So for instance, with my social media icons, maybe I want to change the display style. So maybe I want them to be full color instead of that monochromatic black color. Maybe I want to make them more rounded. So I have this corner radius option. I can bump that up. And lastly, maybe I want to make them a little bit larger. So I can come in here and I can adjust the icon height and the icon width. And I have a lot of other things that I can adjust in here as well, but those are just a few changes I'll make to update the appearance of the social media icons. Once I am finished updating an existing element or choosing my options for an element, I'm going to click on this little X in the corner here to close out of it. And then I am going to click on the Save All Design options up here in the corner. And that Save All Design options, that blue button, is going to be what sends those changes from the site designer to my homepage. So now that I've done that, and this is why I recommend having two tabs open, if I click on my homepage and refresh it, I can now see my updated social media icons. So they're full color now, and they are circular, and they're maybe a little bit bigger than they were before. So again, that's kind of the easiest thing you can do is edit your existing elements. And to do that, I'm going to click on that little gear in the corner, and I've got all of my editing options. And what you'll see if I kind of do that for these other elements, just click on the gear there. Each element has its own set of customization options that you can choose from. And that's going to vary depending on the element. You're going to see things for colors, fonts, font sizes, padding, alignment, spacing. So there are a lot of different options in here, really kind of thousands of choices that you can make to customize the appearance of those header elements. So that would be editing the existing header elements. In addition to that, if you want to add new elements up in your header, or again, down in the footer, these two areas work the same. I'm going to first make sure that I have some space for that element that I'm trying to add. So in this case, I can see my header is full. I don't have any open spaces. So I would need to create a new row here. Once I've added a new row, I am prompted to select content or select an element for that row. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I can choose from all of my different elements here. So in this case, I'm going to choose, again, you've got a lot of options in here that you can select from. But in this case, I'm going to choose our marquee element, which is kind of like a scrolling, almost like a scrolling news ticker. So I'm going to go ahead and select that element for this new space. And then I've got all of my different options for designing and setting it up, just as we saw with those other elements as we were editing. I'm going to leave most of this as is for now. I'm going to close out of here. Now I can see that marquee element has been added to the bottom of my header, and I'm going to save all design options in the corner. Just like before, now that I've made some changes in that site designer, if I refresh my homepage in my second tab here, I can see that marquee element is now scrolling at the bottom of my header there. So if I wanted to come in and make any changes to that marquee, again, I can hover over it, click on that little gear, and I can change whatever I want. So maybe I don't like that gray background. I want to adjust that to white. Maybe I want my text size to be a little bit smaller. I can adjust the text size in here. So whatever changes I want to make, and I can click on that gear in the element to make those changes. Go ahead and save after I've made those changes to the marquee. And now if we refresh, I should see that updated appearance there. Now, sometimes you might want to take a row or a space that you've created and split it into multiple columns so that you can have multiple different elements within the same row here. So for example, if I wanted to take this row where I've added the marquee and I want to split that into a couple different columns, I'm going to come to this gear on the right, and I'm going to be able to add columns to the row using that gear to the right. And eventually it's going to tell me I've reached the maximum number of columns, but I mean, really until you get to that point, you can add as many columns as you want. In this case, I'm just going to add one additional column there. And then just like we saw when I added the marquee, I will be prompted to select content for that new column or that new space that I created. So maybe to the right of my marquee, I want to add, let's say a current date there. Again, I'm going to select the element, set it up however I want. Once I'm happy with it, I will close out of it and save. And now if we refresh my homepage, I can see same row there, same space, but I now have the marquee and the current date within that row together. So two separate elements split into two columns, but within the same row there. And I did see a question. Yeah, so there's not a way to hide that marquee and then unhide it when breaking news isn't happening. You would have to actually go in and remove the marquee. Otherwise, let's say I didn't have a breaking news headline scrolling, you would still see that breaking news label. So I would say you can just remove it from your header if and when you don't want to use it. Otherwise, if I didn't have a breaking news label scrolling there, it would still have this, or if I didn't have a breaking news headline, excuse me, it would still have that breaking news label up at the top in that marquee space. Yeah, that breaking news label does come with the marquee, and you can change well, actually, there is an option to hide the label. Let me take a look. So it might still, if I select to hide that marquee label there, I think it will probably still occupy that space. And I do have a headline scrolling, so that looks kind of funky, but I think you could probably opt to hide that marquee label if you didn't have a headline scrolling. Just know that if I had this somewhere within my header, it would still take up that space. So you could potentially end up with a little bit of white space. I did see the question about replacing the text with a logo, and I am going to get to that here. So I'm going to kind of continue on talking about setting up my header space with the site designer here. So in addition to splitting a row or adding a row and then splitting it into columns, if I want, I can rearrange where that row is in the header by using these arrows to the left and clicking and dragging here. So if I wanted that at the top of my header space instead of at the bottom, again, I can grab these arrows and click and drag. I can also adjust the height and width of rows and columns. Again, that is something that is click and drag here. So if I wanted my height of this row to be a little shorter, I can place my cursor on this border and click and drag, make it a little shorter there. And then if I wanted maybe my marquee to stretch a little bit more, again, I can place my cursor on this border and click and drag to adjust the width. Always when I make adjustments, I do need to click on that blue Save All Design Options in the corner there. And now if we refresh my home page, I see that same row with those elements, only now it is up at the top, and I can see that that marquee element is much wider, takes up much more space in that row than it did before. The last thing I will just say before we get to swapping out elements and replacing that text header with a graphic is sometimes you might want to add either a background color behind a row, kind of like I've got with my menu here, or you might want to add a border to a row, or you might want to add a margin. So if you want to do any kind of editing to the color or the margin of a row, that is going to be something where I go to this gear on the right, and this is where I went to split that row into columns, if you remember a minute ago. This time, instead of adding a column, I am going to edit the row. So then I'm going to edit this row that's got my social media icons in it. So again, I'm going to click on this gear to the right. I'm going to edit the row. And this is where I can update the background color of the row. I can add a top or a bottom border to it, and I can choose how thick I want that border to be, as well as the color. Or I can add a top or bottom margin to the row. So in this case, I'm going to add a black background behind this row with my social media icons. So we're going to switch this background color to black. And I can either do color, which is just going to kind of extend it out to this margin here. Or if I want that black background to go all the way across to the edge of the site, I can actually extend that color the full browser width, which is what I'm going to do in this case. Once I'm done editing that row, I'll click on that X in the corner. I will save. And now if I refresh the home page, I can see that black background applied all the way across to that entire row there. So again, that is how you would edit the background color or add a border or add a margin to a row. I'm going to come to this gear on the right, edit the row styles, and then change that background or add that border or whatever I want to do to stylize that row. To your question earlier in the chat about swapping out my text header here with a logo, that is going to be, this is a really commonly asked question that we get. So that is going to be kind of similar to if I'm editing the element. So I'm going to find that site header text element here. I'm going to click on that gear in the corner. And this time, instead of editing the text header element, I'm going to use this little back arrow in the upper left-hand corner, and I'm going to select a different element for that space. So instead of the site header text element, I'm going to, again, click on that gear in the corner, click on that back arrow, and I will select the site header graphic element instead. Once I do that, I will be prompted to upload my graphic image that I've prepared. And let me see if I can find my graphic image here. I know that I have one. So I will upload that image, and I've got some different options here for things like background color and things like that. I'm going to leave all of that as is. Just like with any other element, once I'm done with it, I will click on this little X in the corner, save all design options. And now if I refresh my home page, I can see that graphic header now in place where my text header was. And my graphic is not super fancy. It doesn't have a logo or anything like that. But same process. Again, you would just click on that gear, click the back arrow, and then select that site header graphic and upload your logo that way. Another thing that some of you might see currently in your header area are elements that are labeled legacy elements. Let me go ahead and add one to my header here. So if you see a legacy element up in your header area, basically what that means is that we have a more updated element that you can use. And we would recommend that you swap out those legacy elements for the newest option, just so that you have the newest option of all of these design elements and you have more customizations and design potential with them. So you can continue to use those legacy elements if you choose, but again, we would recommend that you swap those out. So if I need to replace this legacy element, I'm going to click on that gear in the corner, kind of like we did with that site header element. And I'm going to get a little box here that tells me what I should replace it with. So in this case, it says SNO recommends replacing with the menu bar element. Do this by clicking the back arrow and selecting menu bar. So again, similar to what we did with that site header graphic, I'm going to click on this back arrow here, select the menu bar, set it up however I want. And when I am finished, I will click on this little X in the corner, and then I can do whatever editing I want, adjusting the height of the row, rearranging it, whatever I want to do. But now that legacy element has been replaced there. The last thing just to know here in terms of the header design would be deleting elements. To delete an element, I'm going to hover and click on this little X in the corner here. So I'm going to do that once to delete the element. I still have that space available if I wanted to use it for something else, a different element. If I want to remove the space, I can click on that little X in the corner again, and that will remove the space. So again, it's kind of a double click, once to delete the element and a second time to delete the space there. And I would, again, as with all changes I make in this site designer, I would want to make sure that I save all design options there in the corner. One other thing just to point out with the header and footer design, again, the footer tools work the same way. If I want to add new elements, adjust or edit my existing elements, move elements around, whatever I want to do in my footer, same tools available here. The other thing I will just mention is that up until this point, we've just been working on my desktop version of my header. But if I wanted to toggle and edit my tablet header or my mobile header, I can toggle between those here up at the top. And I think this is really important when it comes to if you are adding or changing your graphic or your logo on the desktop version of your site, you would want to make sure that you go into the tablet and the mobile header design for your site. And I can just toggle with this purple bar up here at the top. And I would want to make sure that I add that graphic header to the tablet and mobile version of my site as well. And kind of a quick hack for you, if you want to see the tablet or mobile version of your site, of course, you can look them up on your phone. You can also just adjust your browser width here, and you're going to see, so I don't know if you can kind of see that subtle change. I'm looking at the desktop version of my site. If I adjust it down, it breaks there to the tablet view of my site. And then if I adjust it down a little bit further, I'm going to see it break again there. And that would be the mobile version of my site. And I can see that both of those are still using that site header text element. So again, I would want to go in there and make sure that I swap that out in the tablet and mobile version of my site to using the graphic. The last thing I want to just briefly mention here. So again, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on widgets today because we do have upcoming webinar sessions where we'll talk about widgets. But the center part of the site designer is your homepage widget areas. And this works a little bit differently than the header or the footer design here. You can think of these homepage widget areas as like the physical configuration of spaces available to place those widgets on your site. So for example, I can see right now my site has a home top left and a home top right widget area, and they each have one widget in them. These little blue boxes represent the widgets. So if I go look here, I can see there is home top left, home top right with the widgets. As I move down the page, then it splits into a full width area. Then I've got 3 columns. Then it goes back to full width, etc. So as I scroll down the page again, I can see there's that full width. There's the 3 columns. And there's when it breaks back into full width. With the homepage widget areas, again, this is kind of like the configuration of those available spaces for widgets. Kind of works the same as the header. So if I want to add new space here, I can add a row. If I want to split that row into columns, I can come to this gear on the right and add columns to it, again, like the header and footer. But rather than adding widgets here, what it's going to ask me to do is add a container or give it a name. So I might call this one something like home bottom left. And I might call this one something like home bottom right. And just like with the header or footer, if I place my cursor on this border, I can click and drag to adjust the width of those columns there. So now I have these two new widget areas created. If I save all design options here and I go look on my home page, I'm not going to see any new content. I'm not going to see any new widgets or any white spaces or anything like that, because again, all I've done is kind of reconfigured this. So if I were to go add widgets to these spaces, I would now have these two spots available, but I'm not actually adding any widgets or adding any content in the homepage widget areas here. So we are about out of time for today. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about how to add widgets to these homepage widget areas, we do have a couple webinars coming up this week. We've got one tomorrow afternoon and one on Friday. So definitely encourage you to sign up for those. Otherwise, like I said, we are just at the end of our time today, so I will stick around for a few minutes. If you have any questions in the chat, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much again for joining me today to learn a little bit more about the Site Designer. I hope to see you again in a future webinar session, and you're free to sign off whenever you are ready. Thanks so much, everybody.